The Pentagon says it's prepared to deploy up to 20,000 National Guard troops to Washington ahead of Inauguration Day. Hundreds of troops were already stationed around the Capitol for Wednesday's impeachment hearings. Over a dozen pro-Trump groups have registered to protest President-elect Biden's inauguration next week. This, as the FBI warns all 50 state capitals that far-right extremists could show up armed to demonstrations. On Tuesday, the nation's top military officers issued a rare joint memo saying, quote, "As service members, we must embody the values and ideals of the nation. Any act to disrupt the constitutional process is not only against our traditions, values, and oath, it is against the law." This comes as the military investigates whether any active duty personnel participated in criminal activity during last week's deadly riot. For more, let's bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns and Daniel Lippman. Caitlin is CBSN's political reporter, and Daniel is a White House and Washington reporter for Politico. Welcome to you both. Daniel, I want to start with you because you have some new reporting on what President Trump is doing in his final days in office. What can you tell us about that?
So he is very surrounded by his, hardcore group of aides. He isn't doing many TV interviews. He is kind of surrounded by the loyalists, and they sometimes tell him, "Hey, you didn't do anything wrong here at the Capitol." And so, of course, he goes out yesterday to the press and says the thing was perfect. So that kind of reminds me of of his saying that the call with the Ukrainian leader was perfect as well. And so it's this denial of reality, and he has basically just given up in terms of fighting against the impeachment.
Well, Caitlin, in an interview with the New York Times, a senior Pentagon official called the security situation in Washington unprecedented. What kind of scenarios is the military preparing for?
Well, right, in that report, that official outlined kind of the worst case scenarios that they are planning for, which involve snipers, drones, active shooters. Inauguration is, of course, just 1 week from today, and there is heightened concern all around Washington about that event, which historically, no matter your politics, tends to be of a celebratory nature. This peaceful transfer of power, of course, is the most sacred and critical of American traditions. This time around, however, when you're walking around the Capitol, you can see thousands of National Guard troops have already been deployed. You mentioned an expected 20,000 troops. As Major was describing in the previous segment, more than serving in Iraq and Afghanistan, just shows you the gravity of this moment. And you could see the images on Capitol Hill, in the visitor center, all around the Capitol, National Guard troops all around, sleeping on the floors. The presence is very heavy because of this heightened security. Our colleagues have also reported about how members of Congress are feeling this sense of insecurity at this time. They have, of course, been briefed over the past couple of days by law enforcement and other officials about continuous attacks and threats out there. And there are these concerns about what happens even when President Trump is no longer president. It's not like these threats will stop. And so there are also concerns about what happens on Inauguration Day. Over a dozen groups have already applied for permits to be able to protest. Mayor Bowser here in D.C. asked the Trump administration to declare a national emergency here in Washington that allows for federal funding and more resources for security. The Trump administration granted that, but everybody on high alert here in Washington just a week before inauguration. Joe Biden yesterday was asked whether he felt comfortable taking the oath of office outside, and he said that he did.
So, Daniel, control room, if we can pull back that video that we were just looking at. So, Daniel, the theme of the Biden inaugural is America United. And for folks who maybe don't know what this video that we were showing earlier, so as I understand it, those were actually military personnel that were grabbing some rest ahead of the impeachment vote. How rare a sight, Daniel, is that? And tell us more about this America United inauguration that we're actually expecting to see?
So it's pretty rare to see troops in the Capitol, but it's not unprecedented. There was, been some Twitter threads from reporters covering the Capitol in terms of information from the Senate Historian's Office that there's been troops in the Capitol during like the 1968 riots, when during World Wars, and so this is not a first-time event. But usually they are only there for kind of foreign adversaries. In this case, you had regular Americans storming the Capitol along with some militia types. And so in terms of your other question, Biden's inauguration was already going to be very different in the first place because of the pandemic, but you're still going to see the two former presidents, or at least three, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and George W. Bush. They're there to underline the peaceful transfer of power. You won't see, President Trump. You will see Vice President Pence, although he's not expected to play a significant role. But there's going to be tons of security, and that'll make it kind of have the feeling of almost a militarized inauguration, even if the televised ceremony is the same as most other inaugurations.
So, Caitlin, as we mentioned, the Joint Chiefs of Staff issuing what seemed to be, pretty obvious directive, but steering clear of any insurrectionist activity. What do we know, Caitlin, about any active military service member involvement in last week's riot?
That's right. That memo was really significant and kind of just showed what has been kind of the focus here. As far as we know, there has been one confirmed Army captain named Emily Rainey, who had reportedly brought about 100 people to this march and participated. That is a known case. You do have members of Congress asking military officials to investigate whether any of those who have been either apprehended or are on the list, whether any of those are active duty members of the military. Jason Crow, who's a congressman from Colorado, he's a former Army Ranger, served combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, said that he talked to the Secretary of the Army and he wanted to have them investigate some of these National Guard troops who are coming into Washington to safeguard the Capitol and surrounding areas ahead of inauguration and during inauguration, to do background checks and just make sure that there are no kind of connections. Other lawmakers have expressed similar concerns, which kind of shows where we are in this moment.
Well, Daniel, Democratic Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill of New Jersey made an allegation that, if true, certainly the only way to describe it is disturbing. This is an allegation against her fellow members of Congress. Let's go ahead and play some of that.
And so not only do I intend to see that the president is removed and never runs for office again and doesn't have access to classified material, I also intend to see that those members of Congress who embedded him, those members of Congress who had groups coming through the Capitol that I saw on January 5th, a reconnaissance for the next day, those members of Congress that incited this violent crowd, those members of Congress that attempted to help our president undermine our democracy. I'm going to see that they're held accountable, and if necessary.
Daniel, has there been any proof to back those claims?
I don't think there has been actual proof to back up her claims, but no one is saying that she's lying when she, said that she saw those members of Congress bring groups of constituents to, walk around the Capitol. But it's a frequent sight where you see members bring in people they know, walking around, and it would be hard to think that those members of Congress would know of the plot to storm the Capitol the next day. They have cushy jobs. They're not, usually the insurrectionist type. And so I don't think they were that dumb to even know about the plan or to try to abet it with reconnaissance missions. And so Those are kind of stark and shocking claims, but so far we've seen no evidence to fully back that up.
All right, and we know that there's an investigation with certain agencies, she says, that has been requested, so perhaps more to come. Caitlin Huey-Burns and Daniel Lippman, thank you both very much.